Okay, hello, Gothic friends. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. How are you today? Thank you for being here if you are here live, and thank you if you are watching this later. This is Alice, and you are in Gothic Land, a place where I help you develop your critical thinking through the Gothic lens. We use communication as a tool to overcome the fears as well, and also to create this negotiation. But here, what we're trying to do is to create this awareness so I can help you with your own problems, your own fears, and your own personal journey. So, welcome once again to this fourth live event, which belongs to a series of 10. So, I'll be doing this tomorrow. I will have a break Saturday, Sunday to keep preparing things for you the following week. So, we will have this week, we will finally finish this big blog that we're doing pretty much of theory, looking at characteristics of the Gothic through, from the beginning until our days. And then from next week, we're going to start looking at more in detail elements, like symbols, like more specific definitions, for example, of horror, terror, the Gothic, differences between them. We're going to be looking into maybe more specific examples. So the idea with these sessions is not just to give you a lot of details because it will be impossible, but actually to give you like an overall idea, an overall view if you are interested in the Gothic, or if you don't know what the Gothic is and you feel this curiosity like I did when I started, and you actually want to know more, you want to know if this is something you would like to pursue, then this is fantastic for you. And later on, as we are finishing this series, then we can keep talking, we can keep having conversation, and then maybe we could think about some future contacts and how you can continue with this, and I will give you a lot of different possibilities and solutions. So let's begin with today's blog. Initially I was going to, and this is what I said yesterday, I was going to do the 4 remaining parts, stages of the Gothic, but the reality is that the Victorian is so huge, is so big, there are so many things to look into that it's not kind of possible to do the 4 of them without going over the 20 minutes that we are doing regularly on these sessions. So what I'm going to do is just talk about the Victorian time and the next stage before the war. All right, so it's modern Gothic is called that period. So you're going to see that there's a reason for this, and the reason is length, and for you to digest all the information. All right, okay, so we're going to start then with the Victorian Gothic. Remember that for Victorian Gothic, I'm going to remind you the ages, okay, the years. So it starts from the 20th of June 1837 to 22nd of January 1901, which was the time where Queen Victoria was on the throne. That's why this is called Victorian period. So we have within the Victorian period, we have Victorian Gothic, as in we're talking about Gothic literature, and you will see that as well as that we're going to start to shift into the Gothic mode. What type of works and books we have in this period? So we have, just remember, this is a reminder, Penny Dreadfuls, we have Edgar Allan Poe, we have the Brontes, we have Charles Dickens, we've got Oscar Wilde, we have Bram Stoker. In the Spanish arena, we have Gustavo Adolfo Becker, we have Espronceda, we also have Emilia Pardo Bazán, who actually moves in, she just starts in this period but she continues in the next period. What she does is a lot of short stories throughout her life, and they are Gothic stories. So this is just the context of the authors. There are many more, we cannot cover them all. I am just pulling up the names that are more common, or that you are going to be more familiarized with, at least the ones that I was more familiarized with when I started my own research. So it is very important at this point that we remember that Victorian times, it was colonization times. So this Gothic is also called Imperial Gothic, or also labeled as Orientalistic Gothic. And we cannot forget that, because we are starting to be in contact with the colonies, with other cultures, with other people around the world, and this is going to cause a certain reaction. It's going to cause friction, it's going to cause curiosity, it's going to cause rejection, and it's going to bring a lot of things like ideologies, racism, discrimination. So it's a very intense period of time, also because this period of time was very long. You have to think there was also the Industrial Revolution. There are lots of elements that I'm not going to be able to cover here in 20 minutes, but you're going to start grasping what I'm talking about. So I want to start with commenting what some professors talk about. So this Imperial Gothic starts with the beginning of the publication of Henry Rider Hager's King Solomon's Mines, but also with the Arabian Nights. Okay, this period with the Arabian Nights, the translation of it. This is something that both Professor Patrick Brantingler and Professor Suzanne Daly talk about in their research. So we have this influence now that arrives to England and arrives from other countries, and it's like a new vision. It's like a discovery for the English. So if Daly, for example, she talks, and I'm going to read some quotes today because I think they're super important. You can find a lot of these professors' works online. For example, Daly talks about the British Empire as in employs and adapts elements drawn from Gothic novels such as, and now we have the characteristics, gloomy, forbidding atmosphere, brutal, tyrannical men, spectacular forms of violence or punishment, and the presence of the occult or supernatural, and shows them in opposition to the other, which is the mysterious, the barbaric, the irrational, the seductive, but at the same time dangerous, because remember, what we don't know is dangerous, we feel threatened. So we have West versus East. So even though they were shown in opposition, all of them, both cultures or both sides, they share common elements with the English predecessors that we saw in the previous sessions. So we still have our tyrants, we still have harems, we have dungeons, abductions, betrayals, mysticism, and women in distress. So this is very interesting, starting from this point, because this is what we're going to be noticing and we're going to see in books like Jane Eyre by Charles Brontes. Sorry, I got stuck. Charles Brontes, Jane Eyre. And this is crucial because in Jane Eyre, what we have is a mad woman in an attic. This mad woman comes from the colonies. She has all the elements that we just mentioned before. We have in a way, she was kind of abducted. We have here a very important communication problem with the language, because probably she married the man in the book. She married this colonizer, and they didn't quite understand each other very well. We have this impression that they didn't understand each other very well. So this tells us a lot about the perception of the English towards the colonies, but also how the colonies saw the colonizers, right? So what we have here is a huge misunderstanding, huge misinterpretation, and lack of empathy based on the fears of the unknown and what starts becoming and starts shaping the other, which is a very huge, great, big element from of the Gothic. So this is something that we also see, and now we're going to start getting everything connected. Something we also see with our beloved Dracula, who, with his impurity, infects the pure. There's a racist message here. There's so much going on in Dracula. Illnesses, invasions, invasion not just physical, as in trying to go and take over England, but also the physical bodily invasion. That's why Dracula is one of these, it never ends. It's immortal. Even the story is immortal because we keep recuperating Dracula. We keep recuperating the image of the vampire, and we are not capable of getting rid of it. We are constantly reinventing it. We constantly talking about it. We romanticize it even more in our modern times. The original Dracula is not what the Dracula we have or the vampires that we have now. They've been super romanticized. They've adapted to our routines. They talk to us. They become our lovers. We become them. It's just a huge evolution of the vampire, the original vampire. In the Spanish case, what we have is with Emilia Pardo Bazán, whose work will also run through the next period, as I said before, because she has shown Gothic stories throughout all her career. So it's not that she only wrote Gothic. She wrote, I think it was called Naturalism or Realism in Spain. Realism, she was trying to portray stories based on folklore and based on people's everyday lives and their beliefs, but from the everyday lives, the routines of people's routines. But then she had all these other stories, the more Gothic stories, where she actually introduced these other elements and she played with these elements, and she was very conscious about using the term Gothic as well in a material. So she's very important because, again, she transitions from one period to the next, but also because what we see once again is what we call, in this case, is the female Gothic that we already saw with Anne Radcliffe, if you remember, that we talked about, that she started setting up these foundations for future, more feministic texts, and she started putting the female character, the female Gothic character, at the same level as the male character. So she stopped being receiving or the receptor of the male's intentions and instincts, and she started to take action at the same level. This is what Emilia also does. And this is what Xavier Aldana Reyes, in his book Spanish Gothic, he says that this was material that in the future was going to become used, was going to be used for feminist purposes in the late 19th century. And he quotes, in the book, he quotes hard and says that Bazán uses the Gothic deliberately as a way of exploring paranoia, center fear of female procreation, which up to this point not many authors wrote about. We will see like America. I'm not talking about American Gothic, which is very important. I've mentioned Edgar Allan Poe, but the American Gothic, it turned more into horror that we know nowadays, and the evolution, although similar to the English one, would need its own space. Okay, I know the Spanish too, but the Spanish, I feel like, because it's my country, that I can talk more about it, and because it's nobody there, or not many people out there talking about the Spanish Gothic in these terms, in these lines. So this is very important because there's this basis of what is going to come next. But these are not the only characteristics of the Victorian Gothic. Other characteristics, and now you have to start thinking about certain books at this point. We have duality. So we have duality, for example, with Jekyll and Hyde. We have perversity in the same characters. You have this perversity. We also have hidden anxieties and dark desires. So it was this idea that we were talking about yesterday when we were saying, or the day before, I can't remember, where we were saying that the Victorians, they had these outside, from the outside, they looked in immaculate, impeccable, so proper. But then even their own clothing, mainly for women, the clothing was restricting them. It was suffocating. It was encorseted. And in fact, we use this term in corseted society because even the clothing showed what society was like, almost like a metaphor of what the society was like. From the outside, very beautiful, the aesthetically lovely, and it was the fashion of the time. But then inside, they were strangling their own organs, and they were actually, it wasn't a healthy thing. So we see these throughout literature as well, the ways that people live and the routines and how they interact with each other. We see that in literature, and this is something that literature does at all levels, not just in the Gothic. So we have these anxieties and dark desires because, yeah, maybe we were incorporated, but whatever was going on in their minds and the deep down repressed desires was something else, and it was causing trauma, and it was causing other things that then psychology, when psychology was invented, it was named, all these things started coming out. Another characteristic of the Victorian Gothic is the mind and its monsters. So we talk about madness, we're talking about diseases, mental diseases that up to that point they didn't know that there was this thing called psychology, that it wouldn't take many years later to have a name. But these mental illnesses were, because of ignorance, they were blamed on possession, on the supernatural, on curses. So pretty much still in the dark 80s, if you allow me to say that. So that's why we have the ghostly and the supernatural so vivid there. There were so many ghostly stories too. There are in Greater Expectations, for example, we see repetitions, we see hauntings, we see doppelgangers, not doppelgangers. We also see that in science we have Darwinism that starts talking about the theories of evolution. So you can imagine the impact of the selection, natural selection, had for the Victorian people every time they saw a weak human being because genetically there was a problem. That was because the strong one had to remain. So imagine the message here. Darwin was highly criticized later on, and but his theories had an impact, which is what is interesting for us, the people that we study the Gothic. So we talk then about the physical monstrosity and deformation as a sign of animalization and evilness. Think about people with physical deformities. There were Siamese people with bodily hair, they were taken to the circus and they were sold. And you can see a lot of articles even nowadays that now they're starting to come out as well. All these people that were treated as animals, as I said, and they were not human. So they showed them, they laughed at them. They didn't quite understand. It was the beginning of the science, so they started investigating. But up to that point, it was all like a mistake, a natural mistake. We also have sexuality and homophobic fears. We see that with the picture of Dorian Gray, for example, and we see that in some other books. So this is starting to, sexuality and these homophobic fears, they start to show up at this moment, and we can see this in different writings. We have illnesses and death. Obviously, this is very much connected to the physical deformation, and because one led to the other. Sometimes when someone is born with a physical problem, then a lot of times there are illnesses connected to those conditions, and then eventually the person dying. Don't forget, this is the time also of Jack the Ripper. So London, of what was going on in the suburbs and prostitution. So we have murder, we have suicides. It's a really intense, dark, dirty, obscure, and yeah, I say dirty because you can imagine the hygiene wasn't either one of the strong side of the this period of time. There were a lot of deaths because of I can't remember now the name. Well, people die from many things, obviously, but one of them was, and this is very interesting, because of these arsenic that they used for dyeing their clothes, to make their clothes green. It's actually a period where they loved taking absenta and a lot of drugs, and they actually ingested morphine, and they, it was a time of a lot of discoveries. Some things were sold as normal, and they were giving this medication that now would be poisonous for the kids. But at the time, it was like to cure stomach pains and to cure certain pains or problems. So there was a lot of, it was a good and at the same time dark time. Okay, so that's why maybe the Gothic also is so intense in this period, because of all these changes and of all these worries, all these fears. Something we haven't really talked about, and that's a mistake that I made because I was trying to get all the more like the aesthetic points. Something I kind of forgotten, and I'm going to mention now, is the Sublime, and I haven't described it. And the Sublime is normally attached to or connected to, if you look at the back of my room there, I've got that painting of I don't remember the name, David Casper, I can't remember. He's the man over the sea of clouds, if I don't remember. But I'm really bad with names. I do apologize. And it's one of my favorite paintings. And that actually describes. So it's always this painting always describes the Sublime. The Sublime. One of the people that talked about the Sublime was Edmund Burke, but it wasn't the only one, okay? And he brought to the Sublime some characteristics, and he brought some information, but it's not the only one. He was a philosopher. And the Sublime, you have to think about this sensation that we always have when you look at paintings like that, of this sensation of being really small in front of the huge, vast world, of the mountains, something that is bigger than us, and it makes you feel very, very small. Is described as the feeling of awe that makes you go, wow, yes. But at the same time, because you feel so small, you feel this fear. And this is super important, and it's something that doesn't just happen in Victorian times. It's already being used in the previous periods, okay? It's just that I didn't mention it, or I didn't really mention it a lot. But I wanted to stop now and tell you more about it. So yes, these feelings of awe from the previous periods, and various periods as well. So we have a lot of characteristics here. Connected to the Sublime, as I said before, we also have the fear and the horrors and the terrors of the mind, right? Nature, something wild. We see this with Frankenstein, when we have our monster, our creation, that is describing the landscape, is describing the Alps, and is describing this huge scenery of rocky mountains that he feels kind of powerless, and then it kind of invites to talk to some kind of god, or some sort of creator. So this is a feeling of horror, but at the same time fascination, and you can rely to this nowadays. So if you think about it, this is how you feel. I feel like that in front of some natural scenery, and when you go out for a walk, and just with the trees. Yeah, I've got a thing for trees. Trees is something that has continued, and people keep writing about trees, because you do get this sublime feeling of, wow, they're so big, they're alive, it looks like they're looking at you, and at the same time they can embrace these animals, so they serve as homes for animals, but at the same time it's like they have their own personality, so they become personified in a lot of stories, so they become alive, they become like this other character. So this is very important, the natural side of the Gothic, also because in the future, when we get to closer to our times, we're going to see all the different multiple subgenres that the Gothic has brought, and they all deal with all these different parts of the Gothic, and people are becoming specialized in Eco-Gothic. It's called Eco-Gothic, and there's a lot of other names, but I will tell you about that next week. We also have vengeance, right? We have forged documents. So we have a lot of elements in the Victorian times that now we start seeing and recognizing more even in our times, because we are still using a lot of these topics. So the next blog, and I will finish with this blog today because we're already 25 minutes. Yeah, I'm already gone past the 20 minutes. Is that the modern Gothic goes from the 1900s to 1945. This is a section that I created like this on purpose because it overlaps with the next one, right? So here we have as one of the representatives of modern Gothic, for me, for you to understand, is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. And one of the main characteristics of this modern Gothic is the Gothic of the fin de siècle, which is got a concern. We're moving away from the landscapes, we're moving away a little bit from the moors, from the wild descriptions of the woods and the forests and as I said, the moors. And we are moving now more into a city kind of context, more an urban setting, because now with the industrialization, people have moved away from, or they're moving away from the countryside to the city. And what we have now is that we have inherited now all from the previous periods. We have all the scientific, medical advances, investigation, interest on the functioning of the body, but also of the mind. So now is when we're getting into Freud. Yes, Sigmund Freud, he's the first one who starts talking about the Unheimliche, which is the strangeness in our day ordinary lives. So all those things that we consider normal all of a sudden become scary. We don't recognize them. We have this with dolls. That's representative a lot with dolls, even with paintings like the one I have in the bag. It's something that I'm familiarized with, but it gave me the jibbies when I was little. And that's why it's here, because it's kind of something and I have to have. Embracing your fears, yeah, that kind of thing. And so with Freud, what we have is that he opens these kind of worms connected to anxieties produced by our own mind and how we perceive the world around us and our reality. And that goes not just from the home, that, you know, it's like this detachment of your own home, the place where you should feel protected and safe, all of the sudden becomes strange and scary. It goes from your home to also your own body, not recognizing your own body. This is the evolution. This is what we have inherited now. Now we have writers like Tracy Fahey that she will talk about the Unheimlich. In this sense, she will talk about bodily discomfort, and she talks openly about what we go through, what the female body goes through, and this is beautiful. But we will talk about Tracy later on as well. So in the case of Rebecca, going back to Daphne du Maurier, with Rebecca we have is that we still have all the elements of the traditional Gothic with the eerie landscapes and manners, yeah, these big houses, castles, manors, with the dark past, the shadows of the ghost, but now we have introduced the psychological arena. Now our characters are a lot rounder. They think, we can see their traumas, their fears, they talk to us, they show the discomforts. So we have then like very detailed this sensation of entrapment and fear mixed with passion and romance and all that getting in the way, yes, getting in the way of the character, can get out, can free herself. So nature still plays an important role. And again, in Rebecca we have the threatening portrait, which to me again is an element that I love. The portrait is almost like a portal, is aesthetically super important for the Victorian time, and later on as well, and before, you see it just kind of extends over time. We have a reminder of, if we have our self-portrait, that we are going to age and that the portrait is going to stay young, which reminds us of the picture of Dorian Gray. So this is again a recurrent motif in the Gothic. If we move down now to authors like Virginia Woolf, even though she didn't write Gothic literature, she does have a book, To the Lighthouse, written in 1927, that is a very good of the Sublime, the Gothic Sublime. And now we go back to Edmund Burke, because the Sublime is a tool that she uses to talk about the human unconscious mind. She talks about the memories, the passing of time, and now for the first, well, not for the first time, but for like some of her contemporaries did, she starts talking about the impact of the First World War in the character's life. So we have also nature again, the wild seas, like another character, almost described as another character, and the role of the house, again, this house that sees all the objects, how they start aging and how they start becoming like being forgotten. So things prevail, even if they deteriorate, they prevail, but people die. You know, the messages in the lighthouse, into the lighthouse, are very, very beautiful, and it has a lot of Gothic elements. So, however, this is not the intention of Woolf. She's not trying with the mentioning or referring to the First World War. She's not trying to criticize from a political or historical point of view and continue doing what her contemporary poets were doing, which is something that Megan Mundy in her 2006 article mentions. She's not trying to do that, but she's just trying to mention the repercussions of these, having your routine broken, having these this breaking into your lives with something so aggressive as the war is, and how we can see that in the routine, in the small details. So right, this is what I wanted to talk about today. And the next two blogs that will be, I'm going to leave those for tomorrow, which will be the post-war Gothic and postmodern Gothic. And here we're going to have again a lot of things to talk about. I don't see anybody around to ask me questions, but remember that you can post them later on when you're watching this video. And remember that what I'm doing is creating awareness and trying to help you with your fears and to see how much of your Gothic life and of your routines you were like familiarized with or not. But if you still want to know more, if you want to start this journey where you find out more about what this means and what that can do for you, I remind you can go to my gothicalice.com and download my free PDF, Down the Rabbit Hole. In that PDF, I give you 6 critical thinking questions that you can start working on to get your brain ticking and finding solutions to your daily problems. 5 bullet points and tools of start targeting your communication fears as well by following certain elements and following certain routines and creating certain habits. And also 5 elements that you're going to find useful from the Gothic to overcome these fears. It's mainly oriented to people who have got oral problems. When they're speaking, they have these panic with people speaking in public, doing presentations. But it's also, I did that thinking about authors who are starting to worry about communicating with others, their feelings, and how to communicate better, different types of writings. Okay, so it's just a base for you to start somewhere with this beautiful world of thinking critically, communicate your thoughts, talk about your fears, and then overcome them, and the Gothic as the lens and the tool to do so. So thank you very much. I will post all the links. Remember, if any of you would like to talk to me, I also have my free, you can have a free hour with me where we can talk, and you can tell me how I can actually help you with your Gothic research, with your Gothic fears. If you want to be a writer, you know, I can help you many ways. So I'll help you create this awareness, and we will see how Gothic your life is. Right, so thank you very much. Leave me your comments, and have a good evening, a good afternoon, or wherever you are, whatever it is. See you tomorrow, Gothic friends, and one more session. We'll finish this first week. See you again. Take care. Bye.